Avatar is a strange kind of blockbuster phenomenon, one that it feels wrong to call a phenomenon because its success has always been so short-lived, less a traditionally beloved franchise than a reoccurring cinematic event built almost entirely on scale and spectacle that overwhelms audiences with its visuals and audio, whilst the storytelling underneath struggles to leave a lasting impression, carefully engineered to be a familiar combination of universally accessible themes and plot beats, simplified and spoon-fed to the point they lose almost all potential profundity. Released 13 years after the original, long enough for a steady improvement in CGI technology to have occurred, there was a curiosity around the first sequel, Way of Water. That Fire and Ash, released at the end of 2025, didn't have the benefit of such a gap may make it a more authentic example, less of an industry anomaly that previously automatically gave Avatar that event status, for whether this franchise truly has the staying power of other big brands it shares the top of the box office charts with. Would Avatar prove itself capable of making the cultural impact everybody online has learnt to make fun of it for not making? Would it prove it's more than a tech demo and more than an experiment for how far spectacle can carry a lack of substance? The answers, it turned out, were not really. Given Avatar The Way of Water and Avatar Fire and Ash were originally conceived as one sequel and were filmed simultaneously, I guess it's unsurprising they would feel less like two distinct entries and more like a single overextended middle chapter split in half, except without the Part 1 and Part 2 in the titles that has been known to irritate people, because it confirms, before you've even sat down to watch the movie, it won't provide a self-contained experience. Regardless of whether Fire and Ash was called Fire and Ash or Way of Water Part 2, that it still feels like a middle chapter is the issue, as rather than tying things up how people expect from the third entry in a trilogy, and rather than feeling like it's concluding a specific era in the lives of the Sully family, it still just feels like setup for the fated fourth and fifth movies, after many people assumed that's what Way of Water's whole deal was for this third movie. Like Way of Water's relation to the original Avatar, Fire and Ash is offering variations of similar narrative events, hindering even the beliefs of casual viewers that it is meaningfully evolving the story. But what's more strange and interesting about Fire and Ash is that it isn't straightforwardly a part 2 of Way of Water. Rather, it is something closer to an alternative version of Way of Water that includes ideas that could have made it into an extended edition that probably could have existed, and the franchise would have been better off if it did, if these two films didn't collectively waste at least 90 minutes on self-indulgent CGI sequences and repetitive plot beats that required it being split into individually overlong 3-hour movies. It creates an unusual dynamic, one I'm not sure I've seen before, where Fire and Ash feels both like a continuation and like material that exists between the previous film scenes. I find it hard to think of anything that could have happened during pre-production to cause this weird extended middle chapter situation other than the fact it was originally conceived as one movie, and Cameron has even confirmed the need to move a major plot point for Spider from the beginning of Way of Water to the beginning of Fire and Ash.
I'm breathing the air.
They had too many ideas for what to put into Avatar 2, so they moved some of it into Avatar 3 and bloated both of their runtimes as if they had to fulfill some contractual obligation to make every Avatar movie 3 hours. Their fatal mistakes were thinking the plot was compelling or deep enough to make for a well-paced story across 6 hours, and thinking the climax of the third movie would make for a satisfying conclusion to that story. In reality, viewers have most commonly criticized it for leaving the franchise's plot in a place barely progressed from where Way of Water had left it, which had barely progressed from where the original Avatar had left it, because both of these sequels spend almost all of their bloated runtimes on simplistic character drama for characters barely likable enough for the average viewer to remember their names. If anything, I think the smaller scale action and intimate, family-focused conclusion resulting from Way of Water's character drama offers a more satisfying climax than Fire and Ash, and Way of Water overall functions more effectively as a standalone film experience, despite arguably wasting more of its runtime on self-indulgent CGI than Fire and Ash.
That's some strong shit.
One of the most disappointing aspects of Fire and Ash is the Fire Clan. Based on the trailers for the film, it seems like an opportunity to introduce some much needed nuance to the Na'vi, and to Awa's supposed benevolent reign over this utopian moon. Their ultimately shallow execution did not live up to my low expectations, as following their union with Quarritch, they are, like everything else, oversimplified, treated as a defective, traitorous clan of Na'vi, adding themselves to the human colonialist forces because they like guns, especially guns that shoot fire. Varang is the clan's cultist-like leader and their only properly established member, but outside of the monologue she gives whilst Quaritch sits in a daze of tribal drugs, she isn't characterised beyond what Una Chaplin portrays in her performance, doesn't prove to be a compelling vehicle through which disillusionment with Awa could be explored, and certainly doesn't create an alternative path other Na'vi could discover to question their loyalty to Awa, turning to the dark side, if I might be so bold. After that drug sequence, which isn't as interesting as it's made out to be, more a way to exposit the Fire Clan's backstory than anything else, she exists as Quaritch's guide, parallel to how Neytiri introduced Jake to a different culture in the original film, and how Spider introduced Quaritch to a different culture in Way of Water. Except, unlike Spider, she's also becoming his romantic interest. These additions to Quaritch's predictable "you and I are not so different" character arc are laughably shallow and brief in how they speedrun Jake's transition, sleeping with Varang in a tent, mingling with the others around a fire, appearing on the human base in their body paint, and then jumping into a fiery abyss at the end as some kind of suicidal acceptance of his Na'vi identity, I guess. Assuming he does actually perish, and it won't be revealed in Avatar 4 that Varang swooped in to save him out of sight. What might be most contrived about the Fire Clan is how, after kind of disappearing for the middle of the film, they abruptly arrive from the distance with RPGs to turn the tides of the final battle, only to be defeated by Kiri's Awa powers, functioning more as a plot device than a believable faction with thematic depth, first giving the otherwise ineffective humans a fighting chance against Jake's newly reassembled forces, and then to promote Awa's spirituality as the correct path for Na'vi life, and more powerful than whatever stereotypical cultist stuff Varang was peddling.
I will eat your heart, Quarritch.
Because the Fire Clan is the only new element added to Quaritch in this film, he's left feeling thin, squandering the multidimensionality Way of Water did manage to give him, lackluster as it may have been. Quaritch's main development is purely aesthetic, aligning himself with the Fire Clan, adopting their look, and briefly attaching himself to their leader, rather than anything meaningfully internal, such as whether he actually cares about Varang, or if he just thinks they're badass in the same hoorah way he interacts with his marine buddies. By the final confrontation in a CGI vortex, he's still defined by the same half-formed arc from the previous film, his conflicted attachment to Spider. He loses in his duel against Jake again, choosing to save his son, and exits in an ambiguous and likely temporary defeat. It's a huge blow to this film's story, and that of the whole franchise, because at this point he remains the only antagonist with any narrative weight, not because he's especially well written, but because everyone else barely functions as characters. The other human figures, like the military commander, the corporate guy, and the whaling captain, exist mostly as background mechanisms to deliver exposition and keep the plot moving, leaving Quaritch to carry a role the writing hasn't kept up with.
Oh, this is awkward.
At one point in the film, when the franchise has gathered perhaps its biggest pile of contrivances, Jake is captured and awaiting execution in an observation cube out in the middle of the human base. Neytiri disguises herself as one of the Fire Clan to try and save him, and Spider is being examined after gaining the ability to breathe on Pandora without a mask. Jermaine Clement plays a human scientist who goes rogue, and in so doing, ensures the survival of the main character, operating an industrial digger to break Jake out of his cube after previously verbally disagreeing with the treatment of the whales during Way of Water. He didn't plan to break Jake out with Neytiri or anyone else, even though her working closely with a human could have really benefited her character arc.
What am I doing? What am I doing? Is my protest noted now, fuckers?
Hey, I gotta say, I'm a real big fan of everything you've done. I'm more than a little awe-inspired right now. The way that you...
Shut up! You've got to stop them. You're the only one who can.
Go! Get out of here!
Anyway, Spider escapes his confinement with absurd ease, until reuniting with Jake to become his meat shield, because his breathing powers are important enough that the returning corporate guy doesn't want him to get shot, but not so important they would leave somebody guarding his lab room. Spider visibly doesn't make for much of a meat shield for Jake, who is twice his height, and for humans with interstellar travel and cloning technology, it wouldn't be unbelievable for them to have guns that auto-aim. Then again, these are the humans whose machinery windows routinely get shot out by arrows. Neytiri fails to eliminate Farang after catching her by surprise chilling in her tent. She flies around the base until picking up Jake and Spider and flying to safety. After her presence notably diminished from the point they moved clans in Way of Water, Neytiri's development revolved around counterbalancing Jake's human militaristic mindset. Now in Fire and Ash, amplified by the grief of her eldest son's passing, Neytiri's story involves her conflicted hostility towards Spider and the human parts their family inherits from Jake. There's enough trauma rooted in her perspective to make this interesting, but the whole dynamic is lacking in tension, and it's quick to reach an underwhelming resolution following Neytiri, Jake and Spider's escape. They land by a river, and whilst Spider rambles obliviously in the background, Jake whispers his sudden change of heart upon learning of the risk Spider's breathing powers could pose to Pandora should humans reverse engineer it to further their invasion, disregarding all his prior family-first motivations and seemingly giving up convincing Neytiri humans aren't inherently evil.
Where are we going? Be quiet.
As he ominously and rudely leads Spider into the forest to sacrifice him out of Neytiri's sight, even though she's been the racist one most keen on sending Spider to live with the humans, the scene doubles down on the unintentional amusement of its look at the flowers clumsiness, and then a fake stabbing sound effect as Jake pierces the air beside Spider's head with his dagger. An insulting attempt to convince the audience the protagonist would actually go through with this severe lapse in judgment.
You used to love me?
Then Neytiri arrives in a panic, having herself changed her racist mind after trying to wash the red paint off her skin in the river water, dissolving the rift this could have made between her and Jake.
And we will find another way.
We move straight on with the rest of the plot, and Spider is just happy to live another day with his adoptive family, and since he's gained these breathing powers and gained a hair tendril, he's no longer at risk of forgetting to charge his breathing masks, forgetting to bring a spare with him should he make a journey where one wouldn't last him long enough, and can eventually plug into the AWA heaven along with everyone else.
You are one of the people.
Oh shit.
That ideological conundrum was mostly Neytiri's thing that Jake became the arbiter of for some reason, and Jake's own equally underdeveloped arc centers on rejecting the mantle of Toruk Makto, the Na'vi clan unifier and symbol of resistance. In Way of Water, he frames this rejection as stepping back from fueling a cycle of violence that endangers his family and turns him into someone he doesn't want to be, or otherwise just to get accepted into the Water clan who want nothing to do with war. There's an idea of a workable internal conflict there, but in practice the film doesn't commit to anything resembling an internal conflict besides Jake hiding from Quarritch and verbally recognizing he might not be able to hide from Quarritch, and that if he can't, he'll do what's necessary, using this new Water clan as his new fortress.
This is our fortress.
Other than these things the film exposits to us, often in voiceover, Jake continues to think and act like a soldier, relying on firearms in combat and leading Na'vi forces in battle, all before, in Fire and Ash, reclaiming the Toruk Makto role he supposedly renounced. The constant feeling of unresolved ideas that limits the emotional and thematic poignancy gets exacerbated firstly by many scenes seeming trapped in a revolving door of vaguely familiar plot beats, and secondly by just how uneventfully many of those plot beats are presented, as though the film is bored of itself and speedrunning via barely conscious muscle memory, and a lack of dramatic oomph is definitely not what you want from this kind of epic scale story. Jake becoming Toruk Makto again is where you can most egregiously see this in effect, finding the special banshee he'd neglected in a cave and thinking up the most laughably lackluster speech imaginable that actually works to unify the clans so they can yet again become action climax background noise.
He made the great speeches.
Many arrows together cannot be broken.
It's not like I expect James Cameron and whoever else was involved in writing the script for this sequel to pull out a King Theoden level speech, but this is so rubbish it makes me question the sanity of anyone inspired to rally behind this human man piloting a Na'vi body.
We cannot be broken!
Jake becoming the Toruk Makto in such a straightforward manner again shows a continued reliance on Jake's uncharismatic, white saviour trope perspective. It becomes only slightly less one-dimensional in the sequels through the distribution of that role across Jake's children. In between pleb and royalty, I guess there lies the leaders of the Water Clan and their children, whose shallow characterization consists of befriending Jake's kids and, in Fire and Ash, helping his remaining son, Loak, get the whales on their side for the totally new upcoming big battle. Another vaguely half-repeated plot point from Way of Water. Loak has survivor's guilt and Jake's resentment really doesn't help, and in a world where they can seemingly communicate with the dead through Awa, no less. Though I'm not sure if that should make the grief more or less difficult because, like everything else, it's barely elaborated on. The Awa realm is simply a heavenly, timeless space where everyone, alive or dead, can reside, so long as they have a hair appendage with which to plug into nature. In the film's darkest moment, Loak takes a gun to his head, but instead decides to go on an artificially biblical quest to find the outcast whales and then go to the Whale Palace to convince the whale elders that pacifism isn't so effective when human machinery becomes perhaps the first threat to your gigantic bodied species. All the important good guys gather here to exaggerate the already heavy-handed emotions of the sad whale backstory with sign language. The next significant development the Water Clan are involved in is their pregnant matriarch taking part in the big final battle, giving birth mid-battle and then dying, just in case we thought the predictability of the contrived melodrama had already reached its peak.
I am dying, but first I will push out this baby.
Lots of expensive-looking CGI stuff happens during the whole final battle, but it pulls all the same tricks as the big final battles from the two other avatars. Maybe by this point I was just burnt out on Avatar, but over the past decade, largely because of Hollywood blockbusters like this, I've realised there's a fairly low ceiling to how much CGI spectacle can impress me. CGI constantly trying to convince you it's real can make the illusion of realism all the more fragile, and unless you've never heard of CGI before, or you think blue alien people could be real, you likely can't help, in the back of your mind, being aware of the actors in motion capture suits, the environments built in software, and the layers of simulation. And when something falls short of true realism, or you get hit by a wave of uncanny valley, it sticks out like a sore thumb. At the end of the day, no matter how realistic it may be, such as if they'd secretly CGI'd Spider the whole film and nobody noticed until they said so, knowing it's all computer generated, once it's confirmed to be, just isn't as special. That the technology exists at all is impressive, sure, but that appreciation of movie magic we'll sometimes get from watching some of the greatest of all time, where we're in awe of how the hell they even came up with this and that, let alone put it to screen, has never come to fruition with any of these Avatar movies for me. Maybe because it's such an extreme overload of CGI, or maybe just because the story doesn't construct a foundation on which to get that ball rolling. That is to say, if these stories were better constructed, I'd have an easier time getting sucked in, but I still think I would struggle to be awestruck compared to things like Lord of the Rings or Pirates of the Caribbean, utilising a lot of practical filmmaking and then using CGI to fill in the gaps. Admittedly, those gaps can get pretty big and even take centre stage, but it always feels in service of a compelling story, and I can't say the same about Avatar. The original Avatar may have been formulaic, but at least that formula held together. These sequels, on the other hand, especially Fire and Ash, feel like they're struggling to maintain even that basic level of cohesion. Fire and Ash still turned a profit, but significantly less than its predecessors, and with this level of narrative stagnation and only marginal technological gains, like the inconsistent use of high frame rate, which has proven even less appealing than 3D if not actively off-putting, there's little reason to expect future installments to reverse the trend. Yeah, the CGI looks incredible, but whilst Way of Water at least laid the groundwork for potential growth, Fire and Ash largely squanders it. Instead of building on that foundation, it treads water, recycling the same ideas in slightly altered forms. It somehow runs longer, lands on a weaker ending that doubles down on Awa as a one-dimensional force for good, and offers no clear sense of where the fourth and fifth films could go beyond repeating the same Sky People return, Jake fights back structure yet again. These films aren't terrible, they're just aggressively middle of the road, elevated above the average blockbuster almost entirely by their visuals, and that's part of the problem. The enormous budgets and cutting-edge CGI raise expectations that the writing and filmmaking don't quite meet. Na'vi go to space, Na'vi go to Earth. It's hard to care what other gimmicky ideas those sequels will bring and likely fall short on delivering, because James Cameron hasn't made a convincing case that Avatar warrants or deserves 2+ decades of his filmmaking career, one that seeks to continually escalate the scale of the spectacle in pursuit of the next big theatrical event.
I think Fire and Ash will make absolute sense to people who are fans of the first film and of movie 2. It feels like a natural extension, and yet at the same time it absolutely swerves into new territory in a way that I think is really healthy for a sequel. I think people can get, they can get bored very quickly, or they can feel like they've seen something before. It's like, why are you making this film? We already saw this.
You love a challenge, and you don't like doing things you've done before, but then what does that mean for you in the future of this franchise?
We never, the scripts for 4 and 5 are written, and they are so different from Fire and Ash and The Way of Water that you won't believe it. If I ever get to make those movies, and once again, the market is changing, the business model may be unsustainable, I can't emphasize that enough. If we squeak by on this one, we'll continue on.
You're willing to stick around in Pandora?
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I've already written the damn scripts. They're great.
And I can see in your face, it's fun. Like
movie 4 is a corker. You won't.
Yeah?
You won't believe it.